Today we're talking to Ratna Sherrer. She is the owner and operator of a business called Bytribal. I'm going to read you off something from her website so she doesn't have to, and then she can kind of clarify for you. Bytribal is a peer-to-peer marketplace for Native American entrepreneurs and artisans. Not only do we host Timothy Navaka's original art, but we also endeavor to host all products Native made for the economic empowerment of indigenous people all over America. Bytribal hopes to be the Amazon of all things Native made one day. So, hi Ratna.
Hey.
Is there something critical to that credo that you think you want to add?
I think it's a little clinical, of course. It's been reworked in an attempt to distill the basic idea down. So I'll try to give more of a bite-sized, I'll try to give more of a two-sentence explanation. The biggest thing I want to emphasize with all of that is the commitment to authenticity. Empowerment of Native Americans goes hand in hand with verifying for authenticity and promoting authentic products. That is absolutely crucial in my opinion.
Great. Also, this is the most basic level, but so Bytribal, is that also like a double entendre? Like it's like also suggesting that you can be UI tribal as well as it being bi-tribal?
Yes. There is a mundane explanation for the somewhat cute spelling, and it's not nearly as fun as me being creative about it. Mainly, the domain name for Bytribal, the BUY part, had already been taken, and the owner did not want to give it up. I'm sure many people who have opened up businesses and whatnot have experienced. So I dropped off the U, and I liked what I saw.
Yeah.
And I think it actually works a little bit better on a conceptual level.
What Bytribal appeared to me to be is that you are sort of like a person that acts as like the consignment seller for various indigenous crafts. I saw original like artwork, like paintings, and I also saw like daily products like fry bread. So that was at the Maker Maven's pop-up sale for Savannah Makes. Like, is that typical of what you do for Bytribal?
It's actually something new I started, so I wouldn't say that it's typical. So that would have been my third event period. I just had my fourth event in Tampa. And what it was Bytribal was purely an online operation at first. It still mainly is. That is where 90% of our, more like 80, the events do take a lot of planning and prep. 80% of our efforts and my efforts go towards the online component. Specifically in promoting the marketplace. So I don't do consignments per se. The original artwork that I had, that was with a client that I have a close relationship with. And, they were willing to let me have a few paintings, a few copies of their prints of their artwork that they had, left over from a show. And I'm like, look, I'm going to be doing this anyways. Let me see if I can, test your product and see what sells. For the most part, everything that I buy, everything that I have bought at my shows. Like, I already paid the natives. Reason why I don't like to do consignment is that it puts both of us in a bind. And it kind of already puts us off on bad footing. It's almost immediately, in my opinion, an adversarial relationship because you're basically giving me product that, has cost you time and money to make, and you're hoping that I don't just not sell it and just hang on to it, or you're hoping that I don't undercut you. So I prefer to do things, on the books, above board. I mean, not that consignment is wrong or anything. There are lots of places that do consignment just fine. But me being a young business, I'd rather just have the product and move it myself.
Right. Well, I guess I think you're to be praised for that because you're also taking on all the risk, right? That it's like you're having to pay the original artisan, and you're not exactly sure when you will get your profit.
Pretty much. I assume all of the risk. I assume all of the risk for the website as well. Everything on there has come out of my own pocket. We're only in our second year. First year, there was a lot of discovery going on. Second year was more discovery. And now we finally put together a strategy to go forward with in the third year. And some of that required me to, well, I guess we can talk about this a little bit later, as we get to it. But, it required, a lot of footwork for me first and second year. But yeah, so the shows are, one of the places where I test products. I try to get more people to go to the website. It's a way to introduce people to the concept of Bytribal. So yes, you can buy things from me at shows, but you're also getting kind of an education. We also recently invested in a display monitor and some other media things in order to kind of show the website in its full glory. So you'll be seeing more of that depending on what kind of show it is. Outdoor shows are a little touchy with power and whatnot. But yes, indoor shows especially, we're trying to display, all of, not just, the artisans I have with me that day, but also the other artisans that, are still on the website that, I'm still developing relationships with.
Great. And so you have a sort of online marketplace where you have the actual items people can see.
Yes.
And you also, I saw that, like, connected with that is you have like a blog, and it had a lot of really interesting and useful observations from the vendors that, like, you, every time you go to collect materials, you're also learning about, like, the local issues. And do you have any sort of, like, thoughts on, like, that process, how they, like, connect together, and how you've sort of been a sort of adjunct or ad hoc journalist too?
Oh, my poor belated blog. It is probably, the funny part is it's probably one of the more labor intensive things to do with the website. Coming up with content for the blog. Not that there isn't a lot of content, but basically finding the time to sit down and get into writing mode. I am a writer, but it's one of those things that takes a lot of emotional and just mental energy. But as far as being an ad hoc journalist, it's one of those things that it just comes with the territory. It wasn't something I planned for. And between all the other things that have to be done, some of which I'm hopefully going to be in the process of outsourcing just a little bit to people that can do it better than I can. It's one of those things that, as with any business, you do need to have some content. I'm also a very visual person, so hopefully, along with the blog, we can start doing small vignettes and bios on the clients that I do have and I am working with. So that's kind of the future of all media related to Bytribal, is to, get eyes onto the process of making some of these really great things.
Items you purchase, it's not something you can just restock online. It's built on individual relationships, and if like you didn't have an eye for the stuff, and if you weren't trusted, like the whole thing wouldn't work. So, is that kind of like you're also like building relationships along with everything else?
Yeah, the relationship part is extremely important. We were talking about as a community, they are both a part of the greater American, society, civilization. So it's kind of an interesting, liminal space that you enter when you go among, because they have some idiosyncratic concerns that are, as in idiosyncratic, as in unique to them, probably the wrong word. They have unique concerns. They have unique, needs that still need to be met. And they also have unique grievances, especially when it comes to the subject, the entire industry of Native American, authentic Native American, anything as a brand. So having people that are willing to trust you, that are Native, if you're doing this if you're working with this group, it goes a long way. It's how basically being as honest and as transparent as you possibly can, is key to this whole thing. And yes, it does fall apart if I don't have those relationships. If I don't, if I'm not there, if they have a question about, a business idea, if they call me, I'm still going to give them my time. And that's one of the other things that, Bytribal, that got baked into Bytribal early in the beginning, is that, there's a touch of concierge to this whole thing. So if you, I've had, clients ask me like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? And I'm like, well, I think that's a good idea. Or, let me do some research for that in my spare time and I'll get back with you on it. So yes, there is a lot of relationship building, and it is greatly built on the fact that, for, excuse my language, but I'm not going to screw anybody over.
I find it really interesting, the aspect of you having to be a kind of ambassador, not just to the individuals you represent, almost like a gallerist, but you're also kind of representing Native American issues towards the general public. So, like, for instance, I thought a kind of like interesting bellwether moment was that you had a kind of story on your blog about how one of the issues that you face collectively is that there's competitive native, quote-unquote, native-inspired artisan pieces that aren't made by native peoples, or
Right.
at least not the native peoples that are selling them. So, like, that's a really tricky issue because I am sympathetic to that issue, but then also, you have maybe, other people with their sort of financial interests and their...
Yes. Look, I understand. Like, here's the thing: the brand of native made is extremely attractive. It's immediately recognizable. And, obviously one of the things that when I pitch to people when I'm writing my business plan is to point out that the fraud still indicates a significant interest and a significant, how would I say, monetary value that's still worth it for these people to do this, if that makes sense. In a really perverse way, the amount of fraud that's happening indicates that this is a valuable brand. So
I was very naive to that market, and for instance, you mentioned some things like that there is a burgeoning or growing understanding of European and market abroad, which is something that I was completely unaware of.
yes, Europeans are a really fascinating lot, especially specifically the Germans. There's a documentary on about them. There's what's his name? Karl May. I can't remember how the German inflection of that name is, but May. He wrote a series of westerns in the early 20th century, like in the 1900s, 1920s, or something like that. And it really struck a chord with the German people. And I'm probably getting the dates for that wrong, but what I know is that it's one of those things probably as old as the Indian market down in Santa Fe itself. And like they really, really love Native American and Western, and they just love the whole history of the West. And they will come out to places, tourists from Germany, from Italy, and they will purchase these things. They'll go out of their way to come out there. And it's one of the things that IANTA, I'm going to get the acronym wrong. Let me look it up. It's kind of long, but it's like it's the American Indigenous Tourism Association. And they have done research on who it is that's coming out to these places. And yes, the European, Japanese, and Italian markets, the German markets, they would like to come to the U.S. and Canada, and they want to experience traditional arts, traditional food, and a traditional way of life. It is endlessly fascinating.
That is something that you learn passively, or is that something that are you personally seeking out European markets for your website sales?
I am trying to leverage European marketplaces for my website. It takes a bit of finesse when we're talking about just doing social media, which is where we are in that stage. So we are hoping to see more of our German friends make an appearance. And we're it's a little difficult especially with Facebook groups and trying to get access to groups that would be interested. Strangely enough, the internet's still a little segregated like that.
I think we're experiencing now, as a world culture, there's just more, maybe because it's the internet, maybe it's just because of the march of time, but there's a little bit more of awareness of that there are other cultures out there that you can find out about, and you can find out about from firsthand sources. So, for instance, like within literature, there's a rise of the so-called Silk Road fiction. So traditionally, lots of, romantic, quote unquote, past stories would be set in a European past, and now stories are being set more and more within what is kind of called the Silk Road, meaning everything from India to China and Japan.
Yes.
So,
I think that kind of stuff is great. I mean, there's just so much you can do with it.
Right. But I think that speaks to the fact that there are sort of maybe more interested audiences in being educated or in finding different experiences, right?
Yes. One of the markets that I was surprised to hear about was Japan, which is funny because Japan actually has its own indigenous people. So a bit of a detour. Indigenous peoples is, in a nutshell, is basically, we joke it's the people that were there before the other people came by. So there are actually quite a number of indigenous folks in places that we consider to be, not that I'm casting any kind of shade on, the authenticity or the, of Japanese people. Let's not get that, let's not do that. But there is a group of people that lived on the island of Japan before what we now know as the modern day Japanese had shown up. And they actually have their own, the Ainu. The Scandinavian countries have the Sami. And it's very interesting because a lot of people don't realize that, Native Americans are unique, but the idea of a First Peoples isn't. There are lots of nations that we have taken for granted as, well, that, like Finland. Finland has always been full of Finnish people. Well, not always. There was another group that was living either concurrently or, before, what we know as the modern day Finnish got there. However many thousands of years.
Even in parts of the world where we thought they were sort of quote unquote immune from the march of colonialism, those Nordic countries, there was, dark-skinned Nordic people that were displaced, and it's not a unique issue. It's every land has been recolonized, seemingly. And we have
every land has this history.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No. Well, I was just wanting to transition that to the idea that because of that, and because that there's so much history, part of that history is that the people you'll be dealing with have a history of being exploited. And when you try to broker deals, or when you say that, like, I would like to sell original native work, there might be this sort of mentality of like, well, I've seen this story play out before, and they might already be sort of cynical. Is that something you've had to kind of overcome, or is it something where it's about an individual talking to an individual?
Well, it's funny because individually and even with natives, I've actually gotten a lot of positive response. The idea of there being a singular marketplace, Amazon for all things native made, plays very well with them. Mainly because I emphasize it is only indigenous sellers. So you have to be, if you're in the United States, I need a tribal ID. So before you can sell, or some sort of paper vouching. Like if you, for whatever reason, didn't want to give me your tribal ID, if you have a letter from SWAIA or whatever, which is the Southwestern Association of Indian Arts, for one of their shows, I'll accept that because the Indian market is airtight about it. Like that is when you emphasize that this is only indigenous sellers. I get a lot of good reactions to that. People are very interested in that kind of stuff. The biggest hurdle, as far as cynicism goes, not really. The biggest hurdle is the same hurdle that any e-commerce platform has, which is just kind of when you have people sign up, but it's sort of like the inertia. Like Etsy has this problem too, or had it in the beginning, where you have a lot of people that have an account, but they haven't gotten around to doing anything with it. So it's not really cynicism. It's really kind of just inertia and that's with everybody in any sort of, group project like this that you have. And, you just kind of got to keep prodding people to remember that you have a resource here that, you can use. But I mean, we're also young. That's the other thing. We're also a young business. So we're still gathering people. We're still, we're still working on our sales and our metrics as far as that goes. That's not really something I'm too terribly concerned about because that'll come with time. The biggest issue that I have had as far as cynicism goes isn't cynicism, it's, I don't know if I should, how to put this, is that some of the, see, which is funny because this isn't really fair for me to say either, because some of my best contacts have been people who were older, elders, and, they've been on my side and they've pulled for me and gotten me meetings. So honestly, I couldn't say. I would say that I've had broad support from all ages and from many different tribes, members of different tribes.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting point because, within your model, you're dealing with individuals, and then you're also having the individual cultural differences between different tribes. Is that something that, I imagine there's an incredible learning curve. Like, you must have to do so much research, and even with good intentions, or even with their helping you, there's got to be so much to learn, right?
Well, it's good that I have people that that are very good about explaining to me what the ins and outs are. Native American anything is highly politicized. And I don't mean in the sense of people talking about cultural appropriation or anything. I mean just in the bureaucracy of dealing with the Indian arts and crafts. I mean, not the Indian arts and crafts, that's not really those people, they do great work and they are overworked. But just the bureaucracy in general of dealing with things that have to deal with stuff on the reservation, period. So what it is that I have contacts, I have people that are willing to talk to me. And they've gone a long way where I haven't had to go and do research on my own, because one of the things that you're going to find is that there really isn't a how-to guide to approach a tribal council member or any of that stuff. You really kind of rely on introductions. You rely on them remembering you and, you're going to meet them. And my contacts are forward-thinking enough in terms of being able to plan ahead far enough that, they've given me crash courses on how to, address people. Addressing people by the proper titles is very important when you get a meeting. That kind of stuff. So, and also understanding that, time on the reservation runs differently from time in, off the reservation. We're very to the point, with our appointments and everything like that. On the reservation, it's just a little different. And I'm from a culture where time is, we have a different concept of time as well, in terms of, when, running late or being early or stuff like that. And so those are some of the cultural differences that was explained to me. It's that's just the way it is. It takes a long time to get an appointment with people. I mean, that's true for any large bureaucracy. And remember, when I go to meet with a tribal elder, I'm meeting with the heads of their government. So, the assumption shouldn't be that, they're taking their time. The assumption should be that they're busy.
Right. Something that is also a kind of cultural clash for me, in talking about what is understood on a reservation and what is understood not on the reservation, is that the idea of what is art and what is craft. So for me, I'll kind of try to jump to the point here that I think we have a sort of academic hangover where a lot of people in Western society, they don't understand the artistry that goes into crafts. So we in Western culture often think of craft as something subservient to fine art, whereas their culture has a different understanding of what you would make to make art, or what even the process of art making is. Industrial arts in the Western world might be considered, if you make a purse, that might be considered less sort of classically art than making a painting. But that sort of mentality wouldn't apply to many indigenous people. Is that something that you have an opinion on or experienced?
So one of the things that is going on with the Indian arts and crafts, apparently there's a distinction between handcrafted, handmade, that kind of stuff, which I was not aware of until I spoke with Nina Alexander at the Indian Arts and Crafts IACA. Yeah, there's a lot of I'm going to throw out a lot of acronyms, and half the times that I can't remember what they stand for because I've been using them shorthand. But yeah, so there is a difference between handmade and handcrafted. I believe handmade, and I could be getting it backwards, but I believe handmade is a reference to things that are, for instance, if you were to do pottery, you would go and actually go get the clay and, coil it yourself, the clay, and do all that stuff to make the pottery. Whereas, for instance, handcrafted, it would be a little different. It would be kind of like maybe buying the materials for whatever it is you're going to make. That's the quickest rundown I can do as far as that goes.
Just in terms of labor and like laws in America, there's the idea that like wherever the last part was assembled is where it was quote unquote made. So
Right.
there's like this issue where people will make stuff in factories in China and then like they basically maybe paint it in Milwaukee and then it's American made. So like some of these terms are almost kind of like ironic or like misleading, right? So like something
Yeah,
can be
yeah.
technically.
The other thing about as far as art goes, so a lot of Native American paintings are artists historically were learned, especially like the Oklahoma Flat School, like they learn, which actually if you look at it has a lot of inspiration from Japanese shunga, not shunga, Japanese watercolors, I believe, style. Because I don't want to give you the wrong style and look up something wrong. But anyways, yeah, which came via, Westerners as well. So a lot of native artists, specifically the painters, they learned they learned from the school of Western painting, especially people that do, narrative paintings. Now, if you're talking about motif paintings or sand paintings, yes, that is their own tradition. But the native arts and crafts world, the art world especially, a lot of things are, a meld of Western and native in terms of what you're going to see. And the difference often lies in subject matter or motifs that they will use. I mean, you have people that, they do gigantic wall-sized Monet-style, paintings of plains buffaloes, that kind of stuff. And then you have people that, make kachina dolls. And the other thing about arts and crafts is that we have a tendency to look at things like art as being performative, like it's made for a audience. And to a certain extent, yes, everybody that is involved in the native arts and crafts industry is selling their stuff to an audience. But some of these traditions were everyday motifs, or they were, how would I say, it's like a Christmas tree isn't really a performative thing. Like we don't buy Christmas trees for other people to look at. We don't, people who make ornaments, we're not really doing it thinking that, we're going to, we're selling a piece of our culture or a piece, or anything like that. And even if people, and it's not really, it's in the background, like it's part of our everyday life. Like these things that you see are part of were and are part of their everyday life. So they're kind of sharing a part of their culture with the rest of, American society. And we see it as exotic. But for them, it's comfort, for them, this is what they grew up around. So one of the things that's hard for people to understand, especially when it comes to music and some of the performances you might see, is that music performances, they're not really intended to please an audience. They would have happened anyways. These are events, if that makes sense. And it's the same thing with some of the art motifs. Yes, they understand because, these people are entrepreneurs that, kachina dolls, people want them. People want kachinas, but these things are a part of their everyday life also. So it's sort of like, it would be like, someone from, I don't know, from another culture looking at Christmas ornaments that are made here and wanting them because it's exotic to them. But for us, it's part of our everyday life. We don't really think anything about it.
Right, absolutely. I can imagine, as a metaphor, like if you were to visit some random high school in America and they're having football or cheerleading practice, that's not necessarily strictly for an audience to consume. It would be what they're doing. Advertising is often direct marketing to a very specific audience. So, for instance, if it's a place that sells steaks, they'll try to advertise to people that buy steaks. And they might even spend as much on the direct advertising as they do the individual products, because when you're buying online, you rely entirely on, that sort of awareness. So for Bytribal, is that something that that you basically find the item itself, and say it was shoes, that would you advertise shoes that are Bytribal to other people just as shoes first, or do you find that it's something that you have to cater towards an audience that's interested or sympathetic to indigenous peoples?
Ideally, we'll play it on the table. Let's be honest. People that want to buy native things, you obviously want to sell to them. But here is my caveat with that. And here's an issue that's actually facing the Native American arts and crafts industry, period. A lot of the people that buy native art, that will go out and they'll buy a painting, that will go and buy a turquoise jewelry, they're getting older. They're basically the baby boomers. The baby boomers, for decades now, since they were young, love Native American things. Vincent Price, recently I discovered, was a huge, lover of indigenous art. He actually had a hand in working with the IACA, the Indian Arts and Crafts Association, back in like the 1940s. But the issue is that the younger generation, people that don't normally buy these things, they're not seeing the value in their parents' paintings and pottery collections. And they're looking to disgorge these items. If I were them, my advice to anyone that listens is to keep them. Put them in storage somewhere, because art doesn't really depreciate. It maintains its value, and it may even go up in value. Especially if you get it appraised. So but a lot of people also don't have the space for it, or they don't see the value in it. These things are being returned, or people are trying to disgorge them at auctions and on eBay and elsewhere. We can't rely on people that just like native things to buy native, if that makes sense.
No, I think that's the answer I was kind of hoping for, in a way, because I think, obviously there's going to be way more people that are just simply buyers than are first and foremost aware or interested in particularly indigenous products.
Right. And, it's very important for people to, here's the thing, every time I've taken someone who's my generation, a millennial or a bit younger, or even a little bit older, out to the Southwest, they've left with lighter pockets and heavier bags, because the things that are made out there are very unique. You're not going to get the same thing. Like, we have an entire industry based around buying unique things. Etsy is $1 billion IPO, I believe. It's inspired other arts and crafts marketplaces like Amazon, who was trying to do their own handcraft thing. And eBay was the first one. So people do want unique things. They also want quality things. And, the small group of people, that produces a lot of this stuff, they have the quality, it's authentic, and it's unique. I think those things are a recipe for young people that are looking to get things that, for instance, there's Artisans makes, she's Canadian First Nations. She makes moccasins, for men and women and children. She makes boots. You can get your own hand-sewn, boots here. They're from moose and deer hide. You can't really get any more unique than that. And they're relatively affordable because you're not dealing with a large corporation that has to do a massive markup because of advertising or anything like that. That's what you're looking at, and you're also getting it for a good price.
So, for instance, that there is a movement towards recycling right now, and understanding that reuse of materials is maybe a good movement for a conscious consumer. And so, with that similarly, there's the idea that, like, first and foremost, maybe I just need a product. I need a plate, what have you, and then it exists on that level. Do I find it attractive? Does it meet my needs? And then there's a secondary under thing that, it's an even benefit that it's made from recycled materials. So similarly, I think that there's that issue with Bytribal, where it could be, you don't have to be having an agenda. It could just be that I like shoes, I like paintings, I like these things, and then that other aspect comes along with it, right?
Yes. The socially conscious aspect. I mean, buying from a native artisan, like, you're helping them, you are helping with your money to preserve a specific artistic or craftsman tradition, because one of the other issues is that because the boomers aren't going to go anywhere anytime soon, not for a while. So it's not like they're going to drop dead tomorrow. But if we don't have a group of people to replace that, there's going to be an issue where you're going to see people that are raised to do this stuff, that know how to bead, that know how to, do, handmade pottery and glaze it in a fire pit and everything. But if nobody's buying it, they're not going to invest in that artistic tradition. And it's going to end up becoming I don't think it'll disappear per se, but it'll become exceedingly rare, which is not particularly great. Maybe it's great for the one person that, is doing it and people are still buying his stuff, but for a tradition, for an entire people, not particularly great, no.
Right. And so you mentioned about how, like, for instance, that Canadian First Nations product of the moose boots, how those are naturally unique, made from products around them. So much of the story behind these things is about the individual journey, and so I think now would be kind of interesting to find out, like, for you personally, how did you get into this sort of market? Like, what was your entry point?
All right. Well, a bit about me. I'm actually a military spouse, and we were stationed in Oklahoma. And I didn't realize that Oklahoma is colloquially known as Indian country until I got there. So, we were glad to, be out of Washington and into the sun. People don't realize how gloomy Washington is. So I got, not that there's anything wrong with Washington, but it does rain a lot. And so there was sunshine, open plains, so we started exploring. I went to a lot of the art shows. I went to the Red Earth Festival. I went to the Chickasha Cultural Center. I did even the little small hole-in-the-wall ones because I wanted to learn more about this culture that I wasn't aware that native tribes play a significant role in the politics and in the economy of the state of Oklahoma. And I don't mean they're growing in number, the number of people that are in the tribe every year. And, Cherokee down in Oklahoma, they have a huge impact on Tulsa. The Chickashaws, same thing. They have a huge impact on their surrounding areas. So it was just interesting to see how, Oklahoma, if you go down there, if you look in the right places and you're paying attention, it's a very interesting look at a place with a significant Native American population, because every fourth license plate on the road is from the reservation. And seeing how they've been woven and integrated into, into a greater American society, and not just any society. We're not talking about a big metropolis like New York. We're talking about cattle ranchers. We're talking about people that have been there since the 1800s. Not recent immigrants that came, from. So it's just an interesting look at how the tribes have integrated and what maybe the rest of the United States may have looked like if certain things hadn't happened the way they had. But so that's kind of where I got my thing. And I had done another startup before with another group. That startup, was put on the back burner by the founders. So I had already gotten the taste for wanting to do my own thing and have my own business. After I'd done the shows, I kind of looked online to see if there's any place to find, an aggregate site that basically collected authentic native goods, and there really wasn't. So I like problems, and apparently I like tackling especially difficult problems I've discovered about myself. And I decided I would do that. I would be the first person to do that.
About making your choices, like is it a matter of choice or taste on your part in terms of what products you decide to carry, or is it also about like, I know that this type of thing is important to the artist, so I want to carry it for them? Is it also things like weight? Like, it probably seems harder and more expensive to ship pottery versus moccasins. So like, do you have any sort of insight into your buying process?
Yes. Ease of movement does play a role. I would like to get some more pottery. I've done hand-fired ornaments, which have proven to be very, very unique, very popular. And the issue is weight. The issue is also what products can I bring to the table. You gotta have to have a balance when you buy these things. People may not want to buy a pot, but they want to support the site, and they may want to buy this thing later, after they thought about it. So I also have to kind of figure out, what smaller items I can carry that can serve as, basically kind of a lead-in, like, an invitation to explore my other clients. So yes, smaller items I've had an easier time moving. At the same time, there are items that I've got that I didn't think I would be able to move. I got them because I'm testing products to see what will move, which is expensive, doing that. Just kind of like doing the shotgun method to see what it is that people like and trying to have a wide enough variety of things. But there were also products that I was afraid weren't going to move. But they did. People will buy quality. People will also, they were basically a pair of really nice smudge feathers made out of caribou parts. And I was like, these are gorgeous, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to sell them. Like, they're almost $100 a pop. But they did. And so obviously, this is one of those things that, people that have a predilection for this stuff either want to have it as ornamentation or they want to have it for their own, their own personal uses. And they're willing to spend the money. So it's almost a trial. Much of it's also a trial and error. And some of it is also weird things like if you don't have enough of a certain product, like people won't buy it. But if you have a big pile of it, then all of a sudden, like people will just like, grab it up. I don't know why that is, but, this certain things you only find out until like, you're like, oh, well, apparently that is a thing. So yes, you learn a lot about the psychology of buying with that sort of stuff.
Do you have any sort of advice for people in terms of being a thoughtful buyer? Because I think something I've noticed is that sometimes people can have good intentions and they can kind of backfire. So like we touched on the idea of if you buy native inspired, that might actually be hurting the actual indigenous people who created the work.
Right.
And also there's obviously opportunities for going wrong when you think you're about spreading awareness, but really it can kind of be in poor taste. So do you have any sort of general guidelines or thoughts from your unique perspective on how people can be thoughtful buyers?
Okay. As far as being a thoughtful buyer, this is where Bytribal this is what we're trying to serve the need, is that if you really want to buy native, you're going to have to kind of do your research, or you're going to have to go to a site, which is unfortunately the problem is that there's not many of these sites, and I'm pretty much the only one that I guarantee that of mine. So as far as that, the best place is to be a conscious buyer because online people can misrepresent. And here is the unfortunate truth is that places like Amazon, Etsy, like eBay, especially eBay, like you don't really know what it is you're getting. People can say that they're Cherokee, and meanwhile, it's more like I heard from my grandma who heard from her grandma that she is the descendant of a Cherokee princess. By the way, there are no such things as Cherokee princesses or princesses anywhere in the Native world. Anybody says that, that is not true. And I know that someone's going to find that offensive, but I don't care. Um, it's the truth. Royalty doesn't really exist in the northern tribes up here in America like people think they do. Anyways, so the best places to get native made goods is you're going to have to kind of also travel, or what you can do is go to some place either like my site or go to the Indian market site, and they will often have a list of people that are Native American. Like SWAIA, that is what they do. They've been around for 100 years. This is all they do. They are indigenously run, and all of their entry not contestants, but all of their featured artisan, and we're looking at almost 2,000, I think, was the number that was told to me last time I checked. You know, all of these people, you can contact them, I believe, or, look them up. A lot of them do have Facebooks and like I said, you got to do a bit of foot traffic. If you really be a conscious buyer, go to SWAIA, go to the Indian market website, go to my website, and you kind of have to go to contact them personally. If you go to Amazon, I think there's only one jeweler on Amazon that guarantees a certificate of authenticity. Like they're an actual Navajo operation. Everything else is Native inspired. Same thing with eBay. eBay especially is notorious. You're just going to have to do a lot of research. So the best thing to do is to and another one is the silver hand. The Alaskans put together a list of Alaska Native, and by the way, Alaska is a very interesting. Go to Alaska, and it's not absolutely, but it's very different from the way tribes are done down here. So the Alaska Natives are another one. You can also go to the tribes themselves. If you want to buy Cherokee art, or you want to buy something, you can go to the tribe and see when they have a powwow. You can see when they, also a list of featured artisans that they have. And usually they have the contact information. Not all of the tribes will do this, but there's 600 of them. So enough of them do it that if you wanted to be a conscientious buyer of native things, it's out there. You just got to do a bit of legwork. It's not instant gratification. You can't really, check out, go to a shop like Amazon and just put it in your shopping cart and check out and get, 2-day shipping. It doesn't really work like that. So, I mean, we're trying to solve that problem. We're trying to make it easier for people to do that. But as of right now, with the exception of my site, you're gonna have to kind of do a little bit of research.
Well, maybe even touching on what you talked about, that, it's so confusing that, the sort of veracity is sort of confused to time, that someone said that their grandmother did this, and people could use that as an excuse to say, like, oh, it's all just chaos. Like, it doesn't matter what I buy or where I buy because it's not knowable. But it is knowable, and there are steps you can take.
Yeah, that is absolutely not true. It is definitely knowable. If you are in Santa Fe, if you go to the Southwest period, there are Sunday, Saturday markets. Palace of the Governors in the Santa Fe Square. That entire strip, you'll have them just, with their stuff, their pottery, their jewelry laid out from the Pueblo natives and from the Pueblo tribes. And Palace of the Governors is also strictly policed. So everyone there is, Navajo, Cochiti, or, from Acoma Pueblo or something. So that is absolutely not true. It's in this day and age, we're used to clicking on a button. We're used to going up onto an app. And unfortunately, the issue is that a lot of, for native arts and crafts, it hasn't really entered the digital age the way it should have. It's kind of been taken advantage of by the digital age. I've heard say that when eBay launched, it had a huge impact on decreasing the value of native arts in the eyes of a lot of people. And one of the other things that I highly recommend is that, if you see something, of course it's fine to discuss price, but also remember you're buying as American as you can possibly get. So be prepared to pay American prices. I've had outfits that, dwarf my outfit by like a million times. They take in 30 million a year and they tell me my items are too expensive. And I'm like, well, that's because these are Native Americans. They're not from, some other country where the cost of living is much lower. That is just what it is. And so yes, there is definitely, to be a conscientious buyer of native goods, you kind of have to do a bit of research. And yeah, like this is where you put, where your money, where your mouth is.
Sure. And maybe this is my time to ask you, is there anything else about the Bytribal story that you feel like you want to share that we haven't covered yet?
Let me think. Well, as far as the story goes, I guess I could do a bit of a shout out. I wouldn't be able to do any of this. I would be lost. Let me put it to you that way. I wouldn't without a direction if it hadn't been for the Nevakoyas, Tim and Alicia. They've done, Alicia Nevakoya especially, she's done a great job advising me on the vagaries of, Indian, Native American arts and crafts, the politics that go into it. Fredbert Herrera and his family out in Cachiti Pueblo is another group of people that is integral in the advice they've given me and the context they've thrown my way. Another individual is hang on for a second. He was actually one of the first guys that helped me out. Oh yes. Wayne Evans. He was integral to, he was actually the guy that gave me, basically wrote a business plan for me and said, this is what you're going to do and this is how you're going to do it. I haven't been able to implement everything that I wanted to with some of his advice. It was a little out of my budget just yet and I didn't have the expertise, but we're working on that. And various individuals, like some of my artisans that have, definitely given me the time of day, like Teresa Toledo, Liz Wallace, who else? And I'm going to get her name wrong. So, Anne Simian, I think is how to say her last name. She's one of my First Nations individuals. So yeah, I mean, those guys are integral to the story of Bytribal, in my opinion. Oh, and of course my husband, who's, stood by me and kept me from, just spinning the whole thing when things got difficult, because he believes in this.
I also want to take this opportunity, since you kind of brought it up, to give you a little bit of credit, because in looking at your website, I saw that you had also been selfless enough to shout out other vendors. That reminds me how, in the midst of all this stuff, risk you're taking, and how you're trying to be a business, but you're also putting that aside enough to shout out your fellow vendors, in North Carolina on your website, or just thinking that it's more important to try to be fair and try to be helpful to your peers than to just be what's the most money I could absolutely make, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have anyone that I have good relationships with, even if they haven't, signed up and made an account, I still take the time to shout out, and I still take the time to reblog them on my Facebook, because one, it's just good business, but two, any type of good relations I have with people, even if they're vendors outside of my circle, we should all really work together, because ultimately, we're all kind of working towards the same thing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that, and I'm hoping that you have some good holiday sales where people can find your website, and we'll be able to link that in the show notes. And any of those references you made, if you feel like you'd like to share a direct link so people can kind of do their own research, I would invite you to do that.
Okay. I will definitely do that. I have those, and especially literature that the IACA has put out. I mean, they're basically the Department of the Interior is really they're really kind of like, in the Bureau of Indian Affairs, I mean, they're really the final word in terms of, how these things are enforced. Oh, fun fact, it is illegal to claim that you are Native American and you're not and sell your stuff as Native made.
Yeah.
So don't do that if anyone's getting any ideas from listening to this.
Yeah. And it's, even if it sounds silly to you, there's a lot of little things like that you're sharing that people really don't know, like myself. And so thank you for dispelling some of my ignorance, and thank you so much for talking to me today.
Oh yeah, definitely. Anytime.